Sadly, I have to do another wrenching video. Maybe some of you guys out there like them, but I would prefer to be cutting this week when I ended up wrenching a bit. Had seen a little bit of oil leaking from my adapter or from the seal. It's not the plug itself, but the bolts holding it. They were a little loose. Added Norlock washers. Because it kept throwing chains on me, and I started looking more at it. We brought out the pressure gauge to see what the chain tensioner pressure was, if something was up there, but it was good, maybe a little bit on the high side. We had 14 up to 15 bars of pressure. Did a few cuts and it didn't drop anything, it didn't notice, so the valve holding the pressure seems to work. Should be, according to the manual or the tech at Komatsu, around 10 from factory, but a lot of times they bump it up a little. So 14 isn't bad. It might wear a little extra on the chain and saw bar, but that has to be it. So started looking at seeing that the alignment between the saw bar itself and the sprocket was a little bit bad, and also that the axle had a bit of play in it. So time to replace the bearings here. Remove the chain catcher and the bolt holding that, and then the drive sprocket and the holder for the drive sprocket. There is a woodruff key slot here, needs to be removed. Then the shim can be removed, and there is a seal there also. I missed parts here. Noticed I had a couple of bolts here damaged also, so that will be addressed. It was tricky getting access to remove the circlip that holds the seal and bearing in place. The shim had been removed, and as I've said before, the videos are a little bit of low priority, and the camera keeps dying on me every now and then. I should invest in a new one at some point, but I will have a few things this winter that must be done before anything else. And they have been very scared about things coming undone, bolting things together here, so tried hammering, tried with a strap, but resorted to a chain that's more solid and leverage to get things to start coming undone. A ratchet strap to bend the pipe up a little to be able to remove the adapter to have access to the inner one, because I suspected it would be the same issue back there. The small adapter for some overflow holes or something, I'm not sure exactly what it does. It makes a loop around the engine, it connects to the side. And with that, all the connections removed, had to remove the adapter at the bottom also to access the bolts. There is kind of a guard around the engine here, and one of the tabs for it was broken off, but that was welded later on. The engine could be slid out, or motor or hydraulic motor. Had an old axle, it's a different style, but it was in a parts bin that you could see kind of what it looked like, so we started hammering the axle out. Then the bearing, the inner race came out by itself, and there is a lock ring behind it, so the outer bearing race was a struggle getting out. My dad held a little tension with a breaker bar, and I kept using the blind bearing puller to eventually get the bearing race out. And then the second lock ring in here was a little bit of a hassle getting out with not the correct pliers, but we could get one hole in and kind of pry it out, so it was out of the groove, and then kind of force it out. Second bearing also needed some help. My dad tapped on it from the inside, and I kept pulling on the outside with the blind bearing puller. One of the missing bolts was a little extra long and held a little tab that secured the central lubing, or the lube for the lube points, so 2 nuts could be put in that and force it out a little until it could be taken with pliers and get it all the way out. Here I search for some, because there is a little plunger at the end of we've removed the saw holder, and there is a plunger at the end of the tensioner, and there are some spring washers under it, and for some reason there were a couple of spring washers on top of the plunger. My dad was grinding away to get the cutting disc small enough to be in here, because I'm gonna remove some wear plate. The upper one I had removed earlier. 2 bolts on the lower wear plate refused to come out, so we ended up cutting the wear plate and breaking that off the bolts, and then applied heat. I had tried that earlier also, but still broke bits in there, so we need to get access to pliers to remove it. New bearing is driven in place, and then there is supposed to be a spacer in between the bearings, and I missed the recording both when taking the old one out and putting the new one back in. Was able to get the circlip in behind the first groove and then tap it into the groove it was supposed to seat, and then the second bearing. After that it's a metal seal. I didn't know, I wanted to see that I could get some grease. This is the wrong grease point. This grease is the pivot point on it, but there is one more grease fitting here that puts grease into the area with the bearings. So put some grease in there to feel that things were getting greased, and then the seal, this side I showed up now, should go toward the bearing. I had to ask the tech at Komatsu for help which way to put it, because the old one was kind of mangled and I didn't pay that much attention when removing it, so that was tapped into place. Then the second lock ring needed to go in there, and with the lock ring securing the bearing and all of that, the axle could be reinstalled. Luckily the axle was still good, because that's apparently quite expensive. This was kind of a cheap fix, because no expensive parts were broken. It's just downtime. And then the Woodruff key, and I forgot to show there is a shim before putting the Woodruff key in place. But if you do this, I guess you have the parts diagram to make sure you get all the pieces where they should be. The drive sprocket, and then the chain catcher, and then tightening things up. And then looking at the area where the wear plate should sit, and this could be part of why I feel like some of the lube has escaped for the chain, that this is mangled, so the saw bar hasn't been flush with the holder for it, and filing it down was futile. It was so much material that needed to be removed here to get them to the new wear plates to sit flush. So some sanding, and then carefully seeing how flat the surface was, and when it was really close I did the last little bit with a hand file to get it as flat as I could. Then I cleaned things up, and here I messed up because I ended up blowing out that plunger that has those spring washers under it, but luckily that could be found and reinstalled. And then we bolted the wear plates with strong Loctite in place. My dad had welded on the saw bar holder some where it was wear. You could see it early in the video how much play there was. I had bought new seals for all the adapters, even if I think I ended up getting the wrong seal for one of them. So stayed in the garage and fitted them. Some of the seals are kind of tapered and it was a little bit of questioning which way to put them, but I think I got it the right way. Here I think I ended up with the wrong seal because the one he had given me just refused to fit, so resorted to the O-ring box to find something that should work. Cleaned up things a little. On the hydraulic motor there should be a fat little O-ring on the axle that was missing or had disintegrated, so that was put there and then it was pushed into place in the axle. Cleaned up the pipes and got ready to start installing things. My dad had welded that cover on. We also changed some of the washers. It's an odd M14 bolt here, so we had to grind out the washer that was, the hole was a tiny bit too small, but some of them that were on there could be reused. It was tightened up, the hose at the bottom was fixed and in place, and then we primed the motor with hydraulic oil. Inner adapter was tightened up. I also added some tread sealant on the treads, and then the small adapter. After the inner pipe had been put in place, that bypass hose going around the motor that I'm not sure what it does was fitted in place. I actually replaced it. It looks quite rotten in areas, but and then the upper pipe, my dad helped out with the strap to pull out the pipe enough to get it in place. Oops, it was here I blew that plunger out. I cleaned up a little more and I took all the washers out again to count how many I had. I might actually miss a few here according to the parts manual, but I think that's a small problem on this machine. So with the magnet pushed it in and then slid the magnet to the side, put the saw bar holder in place, and here I am a little bit embarrassed, but I'm going to tell you the problem we had, because we couldn't get the chain to fit, and we thought the saw bar we started removing little material in the saw bar and also on the bolts in the back that acts as guide, but it really ended up being a little bit of weld left that my dad hadn't ground away, so the saw bar wouldn't seat fully. But we eventually found that out. The lube hose to this point had broken, and I'm not sure, I didn't bother. It was damaged now, so I didn't bother. I just added a grease fitting and greased it for now, and will address it in the future. So we applied some pressure. I wanted to do a test run with the cover off, and then I felt it, and it was still a lot of play sideways, and I brought out feeler gauges because it should push it on there, because it's kind of an angle on the tensioner rod, but there might be some wear on that area, so we decided to do a spacer. I found a suitable thick sheet metal laying around to do a spacer and tighten things up. So some cutting, some drilling, some grinding, and we had a spacer that would fill the gap nicely. And then a test fit, putting it in place, and Now it needs a little bit of force to get in there. We actually had a wooden piece to kind of hammer the saw bar in place a little bit. But the spacer also had a little wobble that might even out over time. So here it's in place with the pressure on. It's very solid sideways, and then we did a few test cuts here that was missed recording it, but and then put the cover back on, and it was out to do a little bit of a test, take a few trees down because it was late in the day. And the small stuff it cut super well. I had a brand new saw bar, brand new chain, but bigger stuff it just got kind of stuck on there. But after a little bit of talk with the Komatsu tech, and I had an odd pressure curve that it applied more and more pressure all the time, where it should apply less pressure when it's in the middle of the cut, so because it's more material to remove. And there are some pretty big trees there, close to 1.8 cubic meters according to the computer, but I also get quite bad diameter readings of these really big trees. And I think that's partly because I have trouble, because I have to follow it, the trunk, while it lays down, and it might be a little operator error. So this video turned out to be a little bit long, but if you have endured watching it, or I hope it might help someone out. So I've actually had the machine up and running now for a couple of days, and it has performed well. So I hope it lasts so I can finish what I must do this winter.